The Galactic Council chamber was an imposing structure, its walls adorned with banners of star systems bound to the Empire's rule. The air hummed with the tension of countless alien delegates. At the center of the room stood an aged veteran, a reptilian creature with scarred scales and eyes that flickered with unease. "They don't fear war," the veteran rasped, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think your fleets, your weapons, your control will break them. But you don't understand humans. They thrive in chaos. In desperation, they are unstoppable." The room erupted into murmurs. Delegates whispered and gestured, some scoffing, others listening with growing unease. The veteran raised a trembling claw, silencing the chatter. "They turned the skies of their enemies into firestorms," he continued. "I saw it. They don't stop because they're strong, they keep going because they refuse to lose." From his seat near the edge of the chamber, Captain Elias Thorne watched with quiet intensity. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He leaned back, his sharp green eyes scanning the faces of the council members. It was a familiar scene, warnings dismissed, arrogance prevailing. "Enough!" boomed a cold, commanding voice. Grand Marshal Kale Zorith rose from his seat. His towering frame, draped in the polished black armor of the Imperial fleet, radiated authority. "You speak as if humans are a threat to the Empire. They are nothing more than an insignificant species confined to a minor corner of the galaxy." The veteran bristled, his voice rising with desperation. "You ignore this at your peril. Humans are dismissed," Zorith interrupted, his tone like a blade cutting through air. Guards stepped forward, leading the protesting veteran out of the chamber. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished table. "Interesting perspective," he said casually, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "Perhaps the veteran has a point. Underestimating an enemy has historically been problematic." Zoritha's gaze snapped to him. The Grand Marshal's icy blue eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a faint sneer. "And what would you know of war, Captain Thorne?" Elias smiled. "Enough to recognize hubris when I see it." A murmur rippled through the room. Zoritha's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he gestured to his aides, who began the next order of business. Elias leaned back again, satisfied. He had made his point, subtle, but deliberate. Later, as the session adjourned, Elias walked briskly through the labyrinthine corridors of the council building. The polished floors reflected the glow of artificial lighting, and the distant murmur of alien voices echoed faintly. His diplomatic badge clipped to his chest earned him nods from passing officials, but his mind was elsewhere. In a quiet alcove, he tapped his communicator. A soft chime answered, followed by a familiar voice. "Elias," whispered Danya, a human intelligence operative stationed in the galactic capital. "Any progress?" "They're as arrogant as ever," Elias said, lowering his voice. "Zorith dismissed the warning outright." "Typical," Danya sighed. "We can't rely on them taking us seriously. The Empire's been tightening its grip on fringe systems. If they see Earth as a threat, they won't see it coming," Elias interrupted. His tone sharpened, and the smirk returned. "But we'll be ready." "What's the update on the weapon?" Danya hesitated. "The intel is solid. A planet killer, Elias. They call it Vornis. It's stationed at the edge of the Centauri sector. If the Empire decides to make an example of anyone, it'll be catastrophic." Elias ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. The news wasn't surprising, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "We'll find a way to counter it. Keep the intel coming." "Understood. And Elias, be careful. They're watching." He ended the call, slipping the communicator into his jacket pocket. His jaw tightened as he walked. The stakes were rising, and humanity's survival hinged on staying one step ahead of the Empire. Back in his quarters, Elias sat at a sleek, minimalist desk. The faint hum of the city outside was a constant reminder of the galactic capital's sprawling expanse. A holographic map hovered in the air before him, displaying the Empire's vast reach. Red markers highlighted systems under unrest. He studied them, his mind working through possibilities. The door chimed. "Enter," he called. The door slid open, revealing Lieutenant Arlen, a young human officer with a sharp gaze and an air of urgency. "Captain, there's movement in the lower districts. Resistance cells are gathering. They're asking for guidance." Elias nodded. "Good. Tell them to keep it quiet. The last thing we need is Zorath catching wind of this." Arlen hesitated. "And the council? Are they receptive?" Elias let out a humorless laugh. "They're blind, Lieutenant. They believe the Empire's power is absolute. But that works to our advantage. Arrogance makes them predictable." Arlen's expression hardened. "What's the plan?" Elias stood, turning to face the map. "We build alliances. Quietly. The Empire thinks we're isolated, but they've underestimated how much the oppressed can unite when they have a common enemy." He tapped a section of the map, where Earth's marker glowed faintly. "And we protect Earth at all costs." The following day, Elias attended a diplomatic gathering hosted by the Empire. The grand hall was a spectacle of opulence, with towering pillars and crystalline chandeliers casting shimmering light across the room. Delegates mingled, exchanging pleasantries and false smiles. Elias spotted Zorath across the room, speaking with a group of high-ranking officials. Their laughter carried over the crowd, sharp and grating. Elias approached, his movements measured, his expression neutral. "Grand Marshal," he said, his tone polite but firm. Zorath turned, his eyes narrowing. "Captain Thorn? What brings you to this corner of the galaxy?" "Duty, as always," Elias replied. He gestured to the gathering. "Impressive display. One might think the Empire has nothing to worry about." Zoratha's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Worry is for the weak, Captain. The Empire is unshakable." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Interesting perspective. I've found that those who claim invincibility are often the most vulnerable." Zoratha's expression darkened. "Tread carefully, Captain. Your insolence is noted." Elias inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Merely an observation, Marshal. Enjoy your evening." As he walked away, Elias felt Zoratha's gaze burning into his back. It was a dangerous game, but one he knew how to play. The Grand Marshal might have power, but Elias had something far more valuable, the element of surprise. Back in his quarters that night, Elias stared out the window at the sprawling city. The Empire thought it had humanity cornered, but they didn't realize the storm brewing in the shadows. "They should have listened," he muttered to himself, the ghost of a smile lingering as the lights of the galactic capital flickered like stars on the horizon. Elias Thorn stood in the heart of the galactic capital's diplomatic wing, a sprawling expanse of corridors carved from crystalline walls and polished obsidian floors. Above him, holographic banners of the Empire's emblem, a silver sun encircled by a crown of stars, cast a cold, sterile light. He adjusted his jacket, brushing a hand over his badge, and made his way to the chamber where Grand Marshal Zorath had summoned him. The invitation had been abrupt, almost curt. That alone was enough to set his mind on edge. The chamber doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. Inside, a dozen high-ranking officials stood around a circular table, their attention drawn to a holographic projection of a distant star system. Zorath was at the center, his dark armor gleaming under the ambient light. The faintest smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as Elias entered. "Ah, Captain Thorn," Zorath said, his voice dripping with feigned civility. "How fortunate you could join us." Elias inclined his head, keeping his expression neutral. "Always an honor to be in the presence of the Empire's finest." Zorath gestured to the hologram, a spinning image of the Centauri sector. "We were just discussing the security of the outer colonies. As you are no doubt aware, certain disturbances have arisen. Rebellious factions. Dissidents emboldened by false hope." Elias crossed his arms, studying the projection. "False hope has a way of becoming real when ignored, Grand Marshal." Zoratha's smirk vanished. The air grew heavier, tension coiling like a serpent ready to strike. The Empire does not ignore rebellion, Captain. We crush it. Elias met his gaze unflinchingly. Of course. But as history often shows, crushing rebellion can sometimes spread the seeds further. Perhaps understanding the cause would be more effective than force. Understanding is a luxury we cannot afford. Zora snapped. And I suggest, Captain, that you remember your place. Elias inclined his head slightly, masking the anger rising in his chest. Merely an observation. Please continue. Later, Elias walked through the shadowed corridors of the capital, his mind racing. The meeting had been a thinly veiled power play, an attempt by Zorath to reassert dominance. But more troubling was the casual mention of the Centauri sector, exactly where the planet-killer weapon, Vornis, was rumored to be stationed. The Empire's focus there couldn't be a coincidence. He tapped his communicator, connecting to Danya. Her voice answered almost immediately, tense but calm. Elias. I assume you're calling about the Centauri meeting? That obvious, huh? Elias said, ducking into a quiet alcove. They're planning something big. Zorath practically spelled it out. Vornis is their failsafe. Danya sighed. I've been digging deeper. The weapon is operational. It's worse than we thought. It doesn't just destroy planets. It uses gravitational pulses to destabilize systems. One strike could collapse entire colonies. Elias pinched the bridge of his nose. And the weakness we talked about? Is it confirmed? It is, Danya said, her tone softening. It's a flaw in the reactor core design. Human ingenuity at its finest. The Empire doesn't even realize it's there. But getting close enough to exploit it? That's another matter. Elias leaned against the cold wall, exhaling slowly. Then we need allies. If we're going to take out Vornis, it won't just be humanity fighting. We need every species the Empire's oppressed to rise with us. That's easier said than done, Danya warned. The other factions are scared, Elias. The Empire's crushed every rebellion they've tried. They won't risk open war. Then we give them a reason to believe, Elias said, his voice steady. I'll start with the Orion Assembly. If they join us, the others will follow. 2 days later, Elias stood on the bridge of a small, unmarked ship gliding through the outer edges of Orion space. The Orion Assembly, a coalition of aquatic and amphibious species, had long resisted the Empire's expansion. Their defiance had cost them dearly, their fleets decimated and their homeworlds under constant surveillance. Yet they remained one of the few powers capable of standing against the Empire, if they could be convinced. Approaching the Assembly's diplomatic station, Arlen announced from the pilot's seat. No signs of Imperial patrols. Good, Elias said, adjusting his jacket. Keep the ship ready for a quick exit. This could go either way. The station loomed ahead, a massive structure suspended above the shimmering surface of a gas giant. Its architecture was alien and organic, resembling a living creature frozen in time. As the ship docked, Elias felt a flicker of unease. He was walking into a den of suspicion and desperation. Inside, he was greeted by a delegation of Orion officials, their amphibious forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. The leader, a towering figure with silver-tipped fins, regarded him with wary eyes. Captain Thorne, the leader said, his voice resonating like a deep current. Why have you come to us? Elias offered a respectful nod. To discuss freedom. Not just for humanity, but for all who've suffered under the Empire's rule. The leader's gaze darkened. And you believe words can achieve what fleets have not? Not words, Elias said, stepping closer. Action. The Empire thinks it's invincible. But every fortress has a weakness. I've found theirs. The delegation exchanged glances, their patterns shifting in subtle waves. The leader's voice softened. Speak plainly, Captain. Elias outlined the details of Vornis, the weapon, its flaw, and the Empire's plans for its use. As he spoke, he watched the officials' expressions shift from skepticism to intrigue. If we strike first, Elias concluded, we can destroy Vornis before the Empire even knows what's happening. But we can't do it alone. Humanity needs allies. Your people have the resources, the strategy. Together, we have a chance. The leader was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. And if we fail? Elias held his gaze. Then we fail fighting for something that matters. But I promise you this, the Empire's greatest strength is its arrogance. They don't see us as threats. That's why we'll win. The room fell into a charged silence. Then the leader extended a webbed hand. You have our support, Captain. But if you betray us, I won't, Elias said firmly, shaking his hand. We're in this together. As the ship departed the station, Arlen turned to Elias. That was bold. What if they said no? They didn't, Elias said simply, though his voice carried a note of relief. One step at a time, Lieutenant. This is how revolutions start. Arlen nodded but remained tense. And Zorith? He's not going to sit idly by. Elias's expression hardened. Let him come. The more attention he gives us, the less he sees what's happening beneath his nose. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into infinity. For the first time in years, Elias felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The Empire's blind spot was growing, and soon, they would see just how dangerous a united rebellion could be. The silence on the bridge of the Orion flagship was oppressive. Dozens of monitors flickered with readouts of the Empire's forces. A vast fleet orbiting the barren moon where Vornis, the planet killer, loomed in shadow. Elias Thorne stood at the command console, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Around him, Orion officers moved with precision, their bioluminescent markings pulsing in low light. Imperial fleet strength is confirmed, Arlen said, his voice low as he scanned the latest data. 2 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, and dozens of fighters. Vornis is stationed at the center. Elias nodded, his jaws set. And their defenses? Around-the-clock patrols. But their sensors are tuned for large fleets, not stealth. If we stay small and coordinated, we can get close. The Orion leader, Commander Lareth, loomed beside Elias, his silver-tipped fins catching the glow of the monitors. And once we're close? You still believe you can destroy it? Elias turned to face him, his voice steady. The reactor flaw is real. A single precision strike will destabilize the core. But we need to buy time for our strike team to get in position. That means keeping their fleet distracted. Lareth regarded him with a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. This is a dangerous plan, Captain Thorne. Revolutions usually are, Elias said. He looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of every officer present. But this isn't just about Earth or Orion. If we succeed, we prove the Empire isn't invincible. We give every oppressed system a reason to fight. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Lareth straightened, his markings glowing brighter. Then we commit. But know this, human, if you're wrong, we'll all pay the price. Elias allowed himself a faint smile. Good thing I'm not wrong. As the coalition fleet assembled in the shadow of a gas giant, Elias stood in the hangar bay of their flagship, addressing the strike team. A mix of humans, Orions, and other alien allies stood before him, their faces tense but resolute. This isn't just another mission, Elias began, pacing slowly. This is about showing the Empire they've underestimated us for the last time. They think they're untouchable, that their power is absolute. But they've made one critical mistake, they didn't plan for us. He paused, letting his words sink in. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting to remind them that even the smallest force, united, can topple the mightiest giant. Stick to your training. Trust your team. And remember, every second we hold their attention is a second closer to victory. The room erupted in quiet, determined cheers. As the team dispersed to their stations, Arlen approached, his expression a mix of nerves and excitement. Think they bought it? Elias clapped a hand on his shoulder. Let's make sure they don't have a reason to doubt. The attack began with precision. The coalition fleet emerged from the gas giant's shadow, their ships darting forward in coordinated formations. The Empire's patrols reacted instantly, fighters scrambling from hangars as alarms blared across their comm channels. Status? Elias called from the command console. Their fleet is mobilizing, Lareth reported. They're focusing on the larger ships. Just as planned? Good. Keep them occupied, Elias said. He turned to Arlen. Signal the strike team. They're clear to move. Inside a cloaked shuttle, the strike team hurtled toward the moon's surface. The ship's pilot, a grizzled Orion named Kalek, navigated the debris field with practiced ease. Elias sat strapped into a seat beside him, his gaze fixed on the viewport. The hulking shape of Vornis grew larger with each passing second. Fighters incoming, Kalek warned, his webbed hands flying over the controls. Keep us steady, Elias said. He tapped his communicator. Team, get ready. Once we're inside, it's a straight shot to the reactor chamber. The shuttle rocked as a stray blast grazed its hull. Alarms blared, but Kalek steadied the craft, guiding it toward a narrow entry port on Vornis's surface. The shuttle slipped through, coming to a jarring halt inside the weapons hangar bay. Move! Elias barked, unstrapping himself and leading the charge. The team disembarked, weapons drawn, as alarms echoed through the cavernous hangar. Imperial guards rushed to intercept them, but the strike team's training held firm. Blaster fire erupted, the sharp crack of energy bolts filling the air. Elias ducked behind a crate, returning fire with precise shots that dropped 2 guards. Arlen covered him, his rifle sweeping the room. Clear! Arlen called. Let's move, Elias ordered, motioning for the team to follow. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Vornis, each step bringing them closer to the reactor. Resistance grew thicker, but the team pressed on, their movements synchronized and efficient. Elias led the way, his mind focused on the mission. Reactor chamber ahead, Kalek announced, pointing to a reinforced door. Elias nodded. Breach it. Explosives were placed, and the team took cover. The blast reverberated through the corridor, and the door crumpled inward. Beyond it, the reactor chamber loomed, a massive, glowing structure pulsing with energy. There it is, Elias said, his voice steady. Arlen, set the charges. Everyone else, hold this position. As Arlen worked, the chamber filled with the sound of boots. Imperial reinforcements poured in, blasters firing in a hail of energy. The strike team returned fire, holding their ground despite being outnumbered. Almost there! Arlen shouted, his hands flying over the detonator. Elias fired into the crowd, his movements precise. A bolt grazed his shoulder, but he didn't falter. Hurry, Arlen! Done! Arlen yelled, stepping back as the charges armed. We've got 60 seconds! Fall back! Elias commanded. The team retreated down the corridor, the sound of pursuing guards echoing behind them. Explosions erupted as the charges detonated, a chain reaction ripping through the reactor chamber. The ground shook violently, and warning sirens blared across the facility. Back in the hangar, Kalek had the shuttle prepped for launch. The team scrambled aboard, the craft lifting off just as the structure began to collapse. Vornis disintegrated in a brilliant flash of light, the shockwave rippling through space. On the bridge of the Orion flagship, cheers erupted as the news came through. The Empire's fleet, disoriented by the destruction, began to falter. Coalition ships pressed the advantage, forcing the Imperials into retreat. Elias stood at the console, his expression calm but resolute. Lareth approached, his markings glowing with approval. You did it, Captain! We did it, Elias corrected. This is just the beginning. As the Coalition fleet regrouped, Elias stared out at the stars, the faint remnants of Vornis glowing in the distance. He knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in years, hope burned brightly. Let them underestimate us again, he muttered, a faint smile playing on his lips. It'll be their last mistake. The Galactic Council chamber was no longer a place of calm deliberation. It was chaos. Delegates from across the Empire's star systems shouted over each other, their voices a cacophony of fear and fury. The destruction of Vornis had shaken the Empire to its core, not just because of the loss of their prized weapon, but because of what it represented: vulnerability. Grand Marshal Kael Zorth sat at the head of the council table, his face a mask of barely contained rage. His knuckles were white as he gripped the armrests of his chair, his icy gaze scanning the room. The whispers of rebellion were growing louder, spreading like wildfire. Planets that had suffered under Imperial rule for centuries now dared to hope. And that hope was a far more dangerous weapon than any fleet. "This council must act!" thundered a delegate from the Carthan system, his furred face twisted with anger. "The destruction of Vornis is proof that the Empire is not invincible. If we do nothing, these insurgents will grow bolder." "And what do you propose?" countered another, a pale-skinned delegate from the Delvian Consortium. "Another show of force? Haven't we learned by now that oppression only breeds resistance?" Zorth slammed his fist onto the table, silencing the room. "Enough. The Empire does not negotiate with traitors. Vornis was an anomaly, nothing more. We will rebuild stronger, and we will crush this rebellion before it gains momentum." A voice from the shadows cut through the tension. "And how do you plan to crush an idea, Grand Marshal?" All eyes turned to the back of the chamber, where Captain Elias Thorne leaned casually against the wall. His diplomatic badge gleamed under the cold light, a reminder that, despite his human origins, he had earned a seat among them. The smirk on his face only added fuel to the already volatile atmosphere. Zorth's glare could have frozen a star. "Captain Thorne? I wondered how long it would take for you to show your face." Elias pushed off the wall, his steps deliberate as he approached the center of the room. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. Watching the mighty Empire scramble after a single loss? It's enlightening." "You tread dangerously close to treason," Zorth hissed. "Treason?" Elias chuckled, his tone laced with mockery. "You call it treason, I call it reality. Vornis wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of your so-called invincibility. And now it's gone. Destroyed by the very people you deemed insignificant." The room fell into a tense silence. Some delegates exchanged uneasy glances, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elias continued, his voice steady and measured. "You've underestimated humanity from the beginning. But here's the thing about humans: we adapt. We learn. And we fight when it matters most. The more you tighten your grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers." Zorth rose from his chair, towering over Elias. "You think your little victory changes anything? The Empire's reach is infinite. Its resources unparalleled. We will rebuild, and you will regret ever crossing us." Elias tilted his head, unfazed by the Grand Marshal's looming presence. "Rebuild all you want. But every ship you send, every planet you subjugate, every weapon you construct, it all costs time and resources. And while you're busy playing catch-up, the rest of us will be organizing, strategizing, and uniting." Zorth's expression twisted into a snarl. "You're nothing but a speck in the grand machine of the Empire. A flea biting at the heels of a giant." Elias took a step closer, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "And what happens when the giant bleeds?" Hours later, Elias stood on the observation deck of an Orion cruiser, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace through the reinforced viewport. The council meeting had gone as expected: posturing, threats, and denial. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Even if Zorth refused to admit it, the Empire was no longer unshakable. Commander Lareth joined him, his silver-tipped fins catching the dim light. "That was a bold move, speaking like that in the council. Zorth will have you executed the moment he gets the chance." Elias smirked, crossing his arms. "He's welcome to try. Besides, he won't touch me. Not while I still have influence in the council. It's the only leverage I have left." Lareth regarded him with a mix of respect and caution. "And what's your next move? You've dealt them a blow, but the Empire won't crumble from a single loss." "That's the point," Elias said, turning to face him. "It's not about one battle. It's about showing the galaxy that the Empire can be beaten. Vornis was just the beginning. Now we rally the others." Lareth nodded, his bioluminescent markings pulsing faintly. The Orion Assembly stands with you. But the question remains, will the others follow? They will, Elias said with quiet conviction. Once they see the cracks in the Empire's armor, they'll know it's time to strike. Fear is what's kept them in line. Hope will set them free. Back on Earth, in a hidden resistance base deep beneath the surface, Elias addressed a gathering of human and alien leaders. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with anticipation. A holographic display of the galaxy hovered in the center, red markers indicating Imperial strongholds and blue representing the growing rebellion. Vornis was a message, Elias began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. The Empire wants us to believe they're invincible. But we've shown them otherwise. And now, the galaxy is watching. A reptilian leader stepped forward, his scaled face etched with skepticism. And what happens when the Empire retaliates? They'll come after us with everything they have. They will, Elias agreed. But that's their mistake. They'll spread themselves thin, trying to control every system, every colony. And that's when we strike. Coordinated, precise, relentless. We won't just survive, we'll make them fear us. The crowd murmured their agreement, the tension in the room giving way to determination. Elias leaned over the console, his green eyes sharp and unyielding. This isn't just about Earth. It's about every species, every system, every soul who's suffered under the Empire's rule. Together, we can bring them to their knees. But we have to move quickly. The Empire won't wait for us to organize. The room erupted into a flurry of activity, leaders coordinating resources, exchanging strategies, and solidifying alliances. Elias stepped back, allowing the momentum to take hold. Arlen approached, his expression grim but hopeful. Think it'll work? He asked. Elias glanced at the holographic map, where the blue markers were slowly spreading. It has to. Because if it doesn't, the galaxy falls. Arlen nodded, the weight of their mission heavy in his eyes. Then we'd better make it count. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. We will. They've underestimated us for the last time,